Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Horse's Mouth Live, where I bring in guests who are expert in so many areas that are helpful for you in every area of your life, but especially your business. And today I am really excited about our topic, which is on storytelling. And storytelling in business, really, how can you use story to deepen relationships with clients, maybe talk about what you do, and we're going to cover a lot of really interesting things like how do you find story ideas and which is too much and not enough. And my friend, Lisa Gerber, is on today, and Lisa is a storytelling strategist. So what Lisa does is work with corporate CEOs, business owners, entrepreneurs, and on how to articulate their ideas so that they can make their goals and visions happen more quickly and easily and increase their influence in the work that they do as well. Especially in this ever-changing digital maze that we're in right now. And there's so much coming at people. She works with organizations really around the globe, managing her virtual team from her home office in the Selkirk Mountains of Idaho. And when you ask Lisa what motivates her to action, here's what she says: deep snow and good wine. It's awesome. Welcome, Lisa. I'm so glad you're here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah. So how did you get into this, being a storytelling strategist, and why are you doing this work, Lisa?
Interesting. Well, it was, like many people, sort of the roundabout, circuitous path to get here. But there was, looking back on it, sort of one particular instance, I guess, that I could give a lot of credit to. And I had a PR agency. It was a small agency. I started in 2004, and about 2008, I had one employee. And when the recession hit, I mean, I lost like half my business in one quarter. It was pretty devastating. And I realized at that time that, wow, I might be really good at communications and PR, but I really have no idea what I'm doing as far as running this agency. So I registered to attend a conference for PR agency leadership. And in the weeks before I attended, I suddenly got this feeling like I didn't belong. Like, what did I think I was doing going to this? I had this vision that the conference would be full of major, like large firm leadership, CEOs of big PR firms from major metropolitan areas. And here is little old me with one employee in, the mountains of Idaho, working on a lot of tourism, hospitality, travel, recreation, those kinds of accounts. And yeah, I had this feeling like I didn't belong. But I put those thoughts aside. I went to the conference anyway, and much to my horror, on the very first day, it's a smallish conference, they asked first-time attendees to get up on the stage and introduce themselves, and I felt like I had been outed. Like, oh my God, I thought I was going to be able to just be like this anonymous person here, and just kind of just take it all in. And here I am taking the stage in front of everyone and telling them who I am, and sharing the story, many of the details which I just shared with you just now. Well, the most fascinating thing happened in the days afterwards, and people came and sought me out. Like, hey, I want to learn more about what you're doing. That is so fascinating. And it was just so unexpected and really, really cool. And it made me realize that sharing your story, like, it requires us to open up and share things that make us very vulnerable, put us at risk, but allow us to create connections and build trust. And I think it was at that point that I started to realize, and that's when, eventually I evolved my practice into more of a storytelling, it's really much more fulfilling for me. And I feel like it gives more fulfilling work to the people that I work with. You know, just a couple other points on that, though, I wanted to share, because when I shared the very thing that I was so certain I needed to hide and suppress, that was the thing that helped me differentiate from others. And so I feel like it's relevant to this conversation that we're having, because financial advisors, I mean, there are a lot of people who do that kind of work, right? And how do we differentiate? And I feel like that is, you know, by opening up and sharing those stories, it really helps make that connection.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard you say like build connections and build trust. And that 100% agree. There's something, I don't know, 300,000 financial advisors. And the advisors that I've worked with, some of them will say, oh no, I'm different because my process is different. Or we have these amazing products that we offer. Well, in a client's viewpoint, that doesn't mean anything to them. That doesn't make you different than the advisor down the street. So having your story is something that really is, no one else can compete with your story, right? And
Right.
And I was thinking, like, from a compliance viewpoint, a lot of times advisors are really worried about compliance and what can I say? Well, I am not a compliance officer, but I can't imagine your story is going to be something that they're going to have an issue with, because it's your story. So like, one of the things that I wonder about is, how do you source stories, or how do you remember them, or decide which ones are pertinent to bring up with clients?
Yeah. That's a great question. I just want to address, though, the point that you were just making about, you know, how many financial advisors, and I just wanted to add that not everyone's going to love your story. So before I get into where you can find them, it's important to, you know, I always advise my clients not to get attached to, like, what if so and so, well, what if I, you know, I'm narrowing my market when I do this. And like at the conference, not every single person came up to me. Like I said, people came up and sought me out. Not every single person did. The people who cared about it, the people who could relate to it, those were the people who came up to me. And so in doing this, you're also attracting the right people to your practice. And I feel like that gives you a much more fulfilling practice. If you come into work every day and you're working with people that you are connected with, that understand you, who you relate to, it's a two-way street. So when it comes to finding the stories are everywhere, in my opinion. But I think first and foremost, it comes down to listening. We have to be good at story listening before we get good at storytelling. And often, I think it was Stephen Covey who said, we often listen to reply rather than listen to understand. And so when you're meeting with a client, when you're talking to, you know, coworkers, it's showing some curiosity and exploring further. Before you can share stories that are meaningful, you want to have all the context that you possibly can, all the background. What's your client dealing with? What's going on in their world right now? What are they worried about? You know, so often what I see in the financial space is that advisors come from a place of, you know, analysis, data, you know, the markets and all that stuff. And that's not necessarily how their clients are actually experiencing it. It's much more of an emotional thing for them. So if you can first come from a place of real empathy and understanding of where they're coming from, then you can draw upon stories to then share in an appropriate manner. So some places, like for me personally, is paying attention to the world around me and the conversations. I have a conversation with a friend during a walk, and she's telling me a story about her personal experience. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, that is a great story to illustrate X. So stories can come from your personal life, your personal experience, your personal hobbies. Again, that's a great way to infuse yourself, your personality into your stories, but they also come from your clients. If a client just makes a passing comment, sends you an email that says something, oh, can you tell me more about that? And then that's an experience that you can share, again, in a confidential way. Obviously, you're not giving away, your client confidence. But yeah, it just comes down to paying attention. And then I like to gather this like stable of stories that I use to illustrate different points. So what are you having conversations about on a day-to-day basis? You have to communicate volatile markets to a client. You have, well, where's a story that you can bring in to help share that?
Yeah, that reminds me of when I was an advisor meeting with people, and after my mom passed away, I knew all about her finances. I managed them. I had a team to help me process things. I couldn't think clearly. Everything felt big. And so after that, I was able to deal with people who were grieving about things in a different way and make it really okay. Like, you are not your full self going into these situations because you're, my mind was compromised, and it took months. And this was not it was a sad loss for me, but my mother was older. It wasn't like a shocking loss. So I think there are ways to do that where you can, show empathy and then share, like, it wasn't always easy for me, and I know what I'm doing. One of the things I've heard people talk about, marketing people in the past, is, oh, like on the video on your website, you should tell your origin story. Like, why are you doing financial advising? And I know some people have great stories, like my mom was widowed when I was 10, and I did not have a good story. I was like, oh, I was in public accounting and I hated it, so I thought I would try financial planning. Like, it wasn't a good origin story. So, like, are there ways, maybe that was never a story I was going to tell, but what I was focusing on is what I didn't have a story for. But maybe you could speak to that a little bit for people that feel like they don't have as good of a story as somebody else does.
Sure. And so it really goes back to my own story that I just shared about why I do what I do. That wasn't like a premeditated, like, our stories don't have to be about life and death or losing everything and regaining it all. No one's clamoring for the movie rights to our stories, right? So I want to sort of dispel that notion that your origin story has to be so fascinating and interesting. And if it is just because you heard it was a great way to make money, or if it's just because it was like the practical thing to do, there's still something that's happened since you've begun this path that makes you think, yeah, this is why I do what I do. So maybe something happened with a client recently where you were able to like really solve their problems, turn their lives around, do something, and that becomes your story. I, didn't think that conference event was, something. And I have other ways of sharing the story too. I have other examples, but it's not to be disingenuous, but it is to draw from your own personal experience, again, so that people can learn more from you and, open up that packaging. When you like get a package that you can't open and how frustrating it is because you just want to get into the contents. And it's like, oh, like a bag of potato chips.
Or when you used to get CDs, right? And you'd have to take off like the wrapper and it was impossible to get off. Yeah, no.
Yes. Yeah, it's just frustrating. Your clients, the people that you are working with, they want to get in and just see a little bit. And you shouldn't feel the pressure to have this incredible origin story. Do you feel like that was helpful? Did that address that enough?
Yeah, because it also gave examples. So I wasn't going to say I thought public accounting was boring and I was going to try. Right. But I like that idea of like what keeps me, what I'm passionate about with the work that I do now. Or that where you really felt like you've made a difference. I think those are beautiful examples, Lisa.
But
Yeah.
it is okay to say, you were in public accounting and it just wasn't filling your cup. It just wasn't, it was a great job on paper, but I really needed to find something else. And this is how I found it. Because again, it's just something relatable. Many people are in work that they aren't passionate about. And so even though it's not relevant to, you becoming my financial advisor, I'm still interested to know that, hey, you too were down a path that you weren't happy with and made a change.
That's really helpful, that it doesn't have to be this earth shattering, like a major thing.
No.
I climb Mount Everest. So when should advisors use stories? Like, where are places that you can deliberately or kind of off the cuff insert stories into the work that you're doing?
Sure. And this is where some instinct and some gut instinct comes into play. But I think a really important, and again, it comes after listening or understanding who you're talking to, because I'm not suggesting by any means that you come into a new client meeting and just well, let me start by telling you my origin story. So there's some listening that's taking place first. We're engaging in a conversation. This isn't this prescribed, just start telling stories and you're going to win the business. Once you learn more about who you're speaking to, if it's a one-on-one meeting, I'm going to talk about some asynchronous storytelling as well. But I think new client meetings are a perfect place to share why it is you do what you do, when the time is appropriate. And be careful not to go on too long about it. And I know, again, this feels vulnerable, speaking about yourself, and does this person really care? It's going to take practice. And it's always a good idea to practice on, maybe you have some really great clients that you have a good relationship with, or a family member, or someone who you can trust their feedback. Hey, do you mind can I, share the story with you, and just practice and get some feedback to make sure that you're not droning on too much, and what kind of feedback. So edit and revise your storytelling for sure. So I think new client meetings are a perfect place. Communications with your existing client, whether you're getting on the phone with them or putting out a newsletter, email about what's going on in the market. There's data. There's a lot of information that you're sharing about what's going on in the market. People are left-brained and right-brained, and there are going to be people who would appreciate having a narrative around what you're seeing. And that just helps create that connection. So those are a great place to have a story about a conversation you had with someone, something that illustrates, that makes sense. Stories do a great job of making sense out of stuff. They also do a great job of showing instead of telling. So I use the example of, if you're trying to tell someone you're great at customer service, that has no meaning. That's like not a very powerful sentence, right? But if you can tell a story that illustrates, and then people infer it on their own, wow, that's really cool. So what are you trying to tell that can't just be said in a sentence? And what's a story that you can share in that place? Lastly, I think another great place, there's so many great places for stories, but another, I do a video series called A Walk in the Woods. Is there something that you are doing to position yourself out in the market where you are sharing stories about your day-to-day experience? Whatever is appropriate, if it's on LinkedIn, if it is an email newsletter, a podcast, if it's through a short video that you post on LinkedIn, another great spot to share stories. And yeah, just get your name out and build deeper relationships.
And I know you would say this, we haven't talked about it, yes, but doing group presentations, whether it's virtual or in person, of course, and an experience that I've had where you're like, people, they want narrative around things. I see financial advisors going so much into like, I have to give them all this information. And over the years, when I've spoken at industry conferences, broker dealer meetings, wherever, years later, someone, if I run into them, will come back to and go, I remember that story about when your son was picturing getting the cat checkers. Now, I didn't even remember ever telling that story, but it landed in someone's mind. And many years later, that was what they remembered. And clients used to do the same thing with me. So I think, has that been your experience, that people actually remember a story much more than they would a directive or a fact or something like that?
Oh yeah, that's 100% it. Again, the facts and data are important, but people, that's not what we recall. We're going to look at that. We need that for our proof and for the credibility, but it's the story around it that's going to make it easier to remember. I've had the same thing happen to me, Ellen. Just last night, someone came up to me and she paraphrased something I had said to her about 6 months ago. I didn't even recall saying it, but it made a mark on her. And we have no idea the impact our stories are having. Just like when I stood on the stage that day and shared my story, and then I got off the stage and was just internally mortified. And then people came up to me and were envious of the work that I was doing. So yeah, it's really remarkable that the impact. Oh my gosh, Jane Goodall said, if you can get into the mind, into the heart with a good story, you may not know it, but people will go on thinking. Mm. And she was referring to her lifetime of activism and environmentalism, and how the interviewer had asked her how she persuades people, how she influences action. And she said that it doesn't work to argue, to be confrontational. And she said that you can get into their hearts with a story and you won't know it, but they'll go on thinking. And I think that's really the goal.
So if someone's just getting started, like they've been more on the data, left brain way of communicating with their clients, maybe they've tried a little bit of storytelling, but it feels they're new at it. What would you suggest that advisors do if they're just getting started focusing on this?
Starting with your why, obviously, Simon Sinek. But starting with your why story, I think, is a great place. But I would also urge anyone who thinks that they're not good at storytelling to rethink the story that they're telling themselves about that, because we tell stories all day, every day. It's how we engage with people. Think about when you go have a coffee with a friend or get together, socially, professionally, you share stories back and forth. So it might feel new in a professional setting, and I get that, but it's really just sort of blurring that line. I think starting with the story about that you and I spoke about earlier, about why it is you do the work that you do, and then practicing. And I think once you start doing that, it really you start to like, oh, wow, this is amazing, the impact that this is having. You get the feedback from people and you just start doing it more. And then I would go back to something that I mentioned earlier, which is just paying attention to conversations, even just casual conversations with a friend during a walk, just paying attention to events and thinking about them. And afterwards, like, oh, that whole incident is a great way to illustrate, this situation, that situation. So I think it's starting with a story of why you do what you do, and then practicing with people in your circle, and then just start going, just start doing it. You'll be amazed at the results.
That's great, Lisa. Thank you so much. So you mentioned your videos, Walk in the Woods. I know you have a great newsletter that I always enjoy reading. I've been on your email list for quite a while now. If people want to connect with you, see the stories that you tell, get some, perhaps work with you, how would they find out more about Lisa Gerber?
Great. Thank you. Thanks for the kind words about the newsletter too. So my website is bigleapcreative.com, and my email address is lisa@bigleapcreative.com. So I work one-on-one with professionals to coach them through the process. I also speak at conferences, and I can facilitate a group training. And I lost my train of thought. And so if you were interested in signing up for the newsletter, you'll find that information on the website. It's every other week, and it's called Stories About Stories. And I really just write about what's inspiring me that week, something I'm reading about, something about storytelling, whether it's the stories we tell ourselves or the stories we tell others. It's yeah, just a little bit of inspiration into everyone's inbox every other week. And LinkedIn is another great place. That's where you'll find, yeah, I share my walk in the woods videos and those blog posts as well.
Good. Thank you, Lisa Gerber. I'm so grateful for you being here today.
Ellen, I'm so grateful for you having me on here. Thank you.
You are welcome. And I am grateful to each and every one of you watching and listening to Horse's Mouth Live, the Extraordinary Advisor Show. Again, my name is Ellen Rogin, and if you'd like to find out more about me and the work I do with advisors and organizations, you can go to ellenrogin.com. That's ROGIN.com. And if you go to ellenrogin.com/horse's mouth, you can download my special report, which is What Extraordinary Advisors Know That Others Don't. And so until next time, the question to ponder is, how are you going to impact with the stories that you are telling yourself and also that you are telling others? Remember to be great and create great every single day.